What's up, everybody? Welcome back to The Pulse. We end our Pride Month series by sitting down with Kieran Thwaites, a queer autistic advocate in Vancouver. The discussion with Kieran offers an insightful exploration of the intersection between autism and queer identities. Kieran shares their background, highlighting cultural resistance to mental health diagnoses and the stigma associated with being both queer and autistic. They emphasize challenges of accessing appropriate health care and support, underscoring the importance of inclusive and intersectional approaches. Kieran finds solace in understanding both queer and autistic communities, noting their mutual support. They stress the importance of visibility and representation, sharing how embracing their identities has led to personal growth and the ability to help others. Kieran encourages others to seek out supportive communities and to confidently take up space. Their narrative advocates for societal and systemic changes to better support individuals with intersecting identities. Without further ado, here's that discussion, hosted by our very own Kayla Tellier, right here on The Pulse.
So, Kieran, can you tell us a little about yourself and your background?
I have a very difficult time answering this question. I born and raised in Canada, always lived in BC, lived in northern BC for almost 15 years in smaller communities. I'm third generation mixed background. My mom was born in Uganda, and her family mostly East Indian background and had been there for a few generations and were expelled in the 70s by Idi Amin. So mixed British, Ismaili, Parsi, and Hindu. Still learning about my culture. What other parts are of interest? I'm queer, trans, non-binary, polyamorous. Sometimes I don't like that label, or it means different things to me than other people. But
When did you first become aware of your autism and your queer identity?
So, it was suggested when probably both had a lot of indications when I was younger, but autism was considered and suggested, and because of my cultural background, like a resistance to mental health, and I fit the typical gifted kid lens, and so with a combination of stigma and fear of medications and labels, didn't receive support, even though it was indicated from 5 for a few years consistently. I unpacked autism myself in 2017. I was having I've had struggled with mental health most of my life, and was struggling with some communication challenges with people close to me, and so spent some time really processing. I was staying with a friend of mine in California, and he was caring for me, so I wasn't houseless. And my other friend was down there, and so we'd go for a walk every night, and we'd walk to In-N-Out, which was about 45 minutes away, and get a burger at midnight. And walk back, and we were talking about communication things. And the more I learned, the more I realized I couldn't grasp what other people's experiences were, which was challenging for me because I'm used to putting effort and intent into something and having some sort of understanding it better rather than that. So it was the start of Dunning-Kruger. And so a couple months later, I was at a music festival, and I simultaneously had my trans epiphanies and my autism epiphanies in the same weekend, or following that weekend. And it was just a switch of, rather than explaining every difference I have with a reason, that realizing that my experience is actually different than many of those around me. But also challenging because always surrounded by queer people. I've had consistently many communities of neurodivergent people throughout my whole life, but unrecognized. And my family is autistic on both sides for multiple generations and has always married and remarried autistic people, and none of them have any idea. So it's a thing.
How has your experience as an autistic person influenced your understanding and expression of your queer identity?
For me, they're inextricable. When starting to process them as an adult, both identities, I had a hard time figuring out which was related to which in some cases, and often the answer is both. In queer community, okay, so we often struggle to find autistic community, especially in person, but in queer community, there are autistic norms within there because so many queer people, and especially trans people, are autistic and or neurodivergent. And so even if it's not recognized, there are autistic norms within queer communities. And so both queer communities are safer for me as a neurodivergent person, and neurodivergent spaces are safer for me as a queer person. I also think once you're already other and outside of a box and not so focused on assimilation and being ostracized, it's a lot easier to embrace other parts of your identity that don't fit so neatly into society. And there's also this learning that has already occurred of understanding ourselves through our own lenses rather than just through the lenses of those around.
And in what ways do you think being queer and autistic intersect in your life? I think you kind of answered that with the last one.
Well, I can go on though. Like currently I'm working for Community, which is a queer resource center in BC, and I do a lot of casework as well and facilitate a bunch of peer groups and youth spaces. And most of the people I support one-on-one are both trans and neurodivergent, often autistic, whether they know that or not, or I mean, I could be wrong on my perception of it, but there are many people at these intersections and at this niche, and these pieces interact with each other and also result in having far less support and understanding from outer communities. And so understanding these pieces about myself helps me support people like myself and be for them what I needed and didn't receive when I was younger. And it's also deeply fulfilling and fantastic and wonderful being connected with people who share my identities and seen. That makes sense.
I think the next one you've also touched on a bit, but would you like to speak any more on how you have found any commonalities or unique challenges in navigating these identities simultaneously?
A lot of the experiences feel parallel. For example, struggling with interacting with medical systems or workplaces or navigating norms in relationships, be that personal or like romantic or friendships or work relationships or familial. Having challenges that are not always visible to those around us, and pieces that often can only be understood by those with lived experience. There's this enormous challenge in the mental health field where, because of how the system is set up, so few queer people and so few neurodivergent people are in these positions of both power and support, because they have extra barriers to being able to get there, either through learning disabilities around learning styles or through mental health challenges that take 5 or 10 years to process, or identities before we are ready to or capable is the wrong word, but supported enough to be able to do these aspects. So there's like an anecdote about autistic people being 10 years behind, or trans people being 10 years behind, and neither of those are true. We have done different work that other people may do in their 50s or something, but that some things take us a bit longer to get into. Anyway, so expanding on that, because of how the systems are set up, people that hold these identities have a hard time finding mental health support, be that doctors or counselors or psychiatrists that share their identities and have lived experience of those identities. And if they do have lived experience, it's often of one rather than an intersection of multiple that are all interacting, be that background or like heritage or neurodivergence or queerness. And often all of these pieces are interacting together. And because current medical and support systems are strained and unsustainable in ways, there's this norm of focusing on only one issue at a time. Let's support you with this one box. And one box is never the whole picture. Somebody comes in and they're like, hey, I need help with finances, or hey, I'm really depressed. And what they're struggling with is a whole array of things behind that are all linked. And so if they can only talk about one thing, they're not receiving support. If they have to, I mean, I go to a different doctor for my stimulants as for my hormone medications, as for other general things, because they genuinely cannot comprehend other things in their specialty. And finding care, adequate care for neurodivergent people, for queer people, is so deeply challenging. And the reality is people that hold these identities don't exist in the support system in a adequate or proportional way.
Would you like to expand on how your experience has been with the autism community regarding your queer identity?
There is a meme I saw on TikTok, this was years ago, I'm TikTok sober, which was, have you ever met a straight autistic girl? And like, I think people exist of all varieties of identities, but there's a norm in autistic spaces of being queer, or of having different ways that I guess it's a different value system than is typical of those around us. And that just innately makes sense to a lot of people. And I think also sometimes queerness takes longer to come into because many autistic people aren't ready to start relationships until they're 25 or a little bit later than some. I myself didn't have my first serious relationship till I was 23, and but I also didn't know I was queer until 27. I thought I was cis het, and the reality was that wasn't it. And so there's also a piece of like replicating what we see around us or what the dominant culture is, and also being so focused on assimilation. And masking is a form of assimilation, but also people of color also do focus on assimilation for safety, or are forced to at times, and that is a different style of masking. And queerness has its own masking of like being in the closet and hiding your identity. And so, yeah, there's these similarities. I find autistic spaces always have room for me as a queer person and my identities, and it has literally never been an issue. I think sometimes people, especially like newer is the wrong word, but trans people that have known themselves for a shorter amount of time will take offense at people's curiosity. And there's a balance of people being considerate and being able to recognize when somebody is being dehumanizing and prioritizing their curiosity over treating another human being decently, but while holding a little space for genuine compassionate curiosity. I haven't found any issues with my queerness in any autistic neurodivergent space.
And on the other side of things, how has the queer community received your autism diagnosis?
Stigma exists everywhere around autism. The queer community, many have a lot of trauma of, half of trans people lose their families over coming out. And so there are these fears of being visible, of being different, of being other. And there is more of a culture of assimilation within the queer community. Every queer community is different. You'll have non-binary dominant places, trans dominant places. You'll have very cis binary lesbian spaces that are entirely different than a lesbian space in a different neighborhood that has more of a BIPOC community. So there are many variations of queer spaces, and I can't summarize in a singular, but there is similar lack of understanding around autism for some people. On the other hand, as we're saying, there's a lot of neurodivergent people in general within the queer community, and I think I don't like a hierarchy of marginalization, but identities that are less supported, sort of being trans compared to being queer or gay, the more challenges people have, typically I find those spaces to be more neurodivergent in a ratio of how many people or people with intersecting ADHD and autism. And often that's unrecognized, right? Like people are like, oh, I'm already queer. I don't want to have more labels. There's a stigma around having too many labels. That even I subscribe to. I have other medical labels that would probably fit me, and it doesn't serve me to pursue them further. And maybe that changes, but there's a balance of being othered and being palatable and balancing all those pieces and challenging. Anyway, I lost my train of thought. So queer spaces that have more challenges, I find, are more neurodivergent. Okay, picking up, not more as in more autistic, just more autistic people. But that's not always recognized. I was trying to get to. I recognize it and see it in those around me, and I'd say easily half of trans people I interact with are certainly neurodivergent. Do that many have that understanding of themselves? I think in people more my age, I'd say no, and in youth I support, I'd say yes. I think for those that it impacts, the freedom of knowledge and of language and of communication through social media online has really empowered younger people to be able to understand themselves and their identities earlier. And so a lot of the younger queer spaces I support do recognize that they're neurodivergent, whereas I see a lot of unrecognized neurodivergence in older queer populations.
That was great. Yeah, you answered my question before I had a chance to ask. I was going to ask if you thought that was due to more knowledge being out there and more accessible to people. And yeah, you answered it before I asked it. That was perfect. So can you share any positive experiences or support systems you've encountered within these communities?
I genuinely think the biggest resource is peers. I think our support systems are lacking, and that's a problem and an injustice, and we also can't change that in this exact moment. And I have our peer group together, and peer groups were life-changing for me. There's this beautiful flow of being able to receive support and support others at different times, and that it's non-transactional. And I really think the best resources for people are other people who have been in their position, who are having those same struggles. At my work, I'm not a counselor and I'm not a social worker, and I like that because I have more freedom to interact in ways that aren't typical to formal support, where I get to connect through storytelling and I can share resources of online communities and of knowledge that I learned or that other people lean on that I haven't necessarily learned yet, and that we're just connecting our community to other communities. And in the same way, being in those spaces, I receive support or resources on a regular basis, and even people I'm supporting share their resources with me, which are then useful for me. And so it's community support and community care. These are the core pieces of my identity and my role in the world, and they're also, I feel like, integral to queer people and to neurodivergent people.
And how important do you think visibility and representation are for queer autistic individuals?
So there's this challenge that we have as autistic people of growing up feeling alien often. You might be raised by an autistic family that don't know that about themselves, and feel other even surrounded by our people. Or we might have an early diagnosis and be around autistic people and feel other in a different way. That's maybe getting into too much detail, but we have a norm of feeling other in every space. And prior to understanding our identities, it feels overwhelming and deeply distressing. And when we get to the point of beginning to understand our identities, for me, I thought this would shift. And in some aspects it did. I would say even into my 20s, I had never met somebody else where I was like, oh, you are a future version of me. I had so few humans I could look up to. And partially because of how I was raised, I had some ego things of being a bit full of myself and or thinking I was better than others, and rather I was different. And that was a barrier for me connecting with other people. But it took so long before I was able to see other people who shared my experiences and how I thought and what I struggled with. And when I did find community with other autistic people and later other queer people and people at that intersection, I felt seen and understood and less isolated and alone and incapable in really powerful and necessary ways. And there's a side piece of still feeling alien, even surrounded by people holding my identities. I can be in a trans space and feel like I don't fit in. I can be in an autistic space. I can be in an autistic trans space and feel like I don't fit in and I stick out. And our brains do this. And so the theme recently has been, if you're looking for differences, you will find them. Like our brains connect all the patterns, and we will find ways that we stick out and don't fit in if we're looking for them. And so I've been focusing on trying to have the lens be on what do we share? What do we have in common? What do we connect over? What do we have similar? No person will match all of our identities and our experiences and our challenges and our struggles. And it's really easy for that to be isolating. And it is isolating, and I think we will always carry some pieces of that, but there are so many things we can connect with others over to. And so going back to your question, visibility is important because I think many of us connect to ideas through experiencing them. I had trans friends and didn't consider for a second I was trans for years. I had whole conversations about, would I be happier in another body? And I was like, no, definitely not. And I couldn't, I knew of people, but I knew about trans people from when I was 5. I knew about autistic people from probably before then. And I knew I had some similarities, and there was still a disconnect of being able to relate myself to them because I hadn't connected with them. And it took me till 27 to connect with either of those communities in ways that were fulfilling and supportive for me. So visibility is challenging. Visibility also has to be realistic. I think a lot of the visibility is very simplified and unrealistic narratives, which lead to further imposter syndrome and like gaslighting yourself. And so, for example, I can't remember her name, but in Heartbreak Highs, there's an autistic character played by an autistic actor, and it's written in a way that I can relate to parts of it. And seeing that was an incredible feeling. I was like, oh, I can relate to this human. They're a different human than me, and I can relate to them. And so having positive and normalized representation. I have a hard time recommending the show Euphoria, but there's a trans character in there played by a trans person, and the show is not about being trans. It doesn't matter. They're just a human. And so having these kinds of representation would have been life-changing for me as 20 years ago. Yeah, so representation is challenging, hard to do it well, and it's also life-changing and important. And I think that's the beauty of TikTok for a lot of queer and neurodivergent people, is seeing imperfect versions, like seeing unfiltered, realistic versions of other humans, and being able to connect with those experiences and see that for themselves. And there's many bad things about it, but there's some beauty in the algorithms of aligning people with what they're drawn to, even if they don't quite know it yet.
Have you ever seen the show New Amsterdam?
My partner has been watching it, and I haven't, but I watched a few episodes of them, and I'm like, why is so much autism?
There is also like a semi-background character nurse who has like a few lines here and there throughout the show, and they are non-binary. And the only reason that you know that they are non-binary is because every other character, when they refer to them, refers to them as they, them. And just like in such a natural way that I love so much, because it doesn't make that character all about being non-binary, but it's very obvious that they are, and the other characters respect that. And yeah, I really like the approach they took to that one.
It doesn't have to be like centralized and focused. Like at my work, mostly all I have to do is show up and exist. Like I just have to exist as an older human being that, I mean, life is hard and I'm still just alive. And that is inspiring for people. Humans, I meet parents who are deeply unsupportive of their children, and they'll have an interaction with me and be like, oh, you're just a normal human being. And like, we need normal representation. That's what we need. And normalizing representation, that it doesn't have to be a tokenized or a simplified version or a like compelling character. Yeah, it's an issue, and it seems to be improving a little bit. And also every time there's really good representation in a show, the show gets canceled. So it is what it is. Film industry is a mess.
Yeah, that is unfortunately seems to be very true. And are there any advocacy or support groups that you have found particularly helpful or inclusive?
No. Okay, online community. And the internet has its own problems, and there's a lot of mentally struggling people there who are projecting their own insecurities and stuff, and there's always a balance of it. Okay, so yeah, online communities are, and this is kind of going back to the peer support of like connecting with people like us. I learned emotional regulation and communication and how to process my feelings online as a teenager. And like that was always a battle with my parents of computer time, and also that was my regulation, and that was where I was learning, and that was where I had people I felt safe with. I still have friends today from 20 years ago that we were all just dissociating online, and that was my safety at the time. And I was drawn to it, and I knew I needed it, but I didn't have an effective way to communicate that it was important and necessary for me. And like none of these were queer or autistic spaces. And looking back, there were many neurodivergent and queer people in my community. When we start to actually understand our identities, then we can shift into spaces with others that have that language and be a part of those. And there's these fears that parents have that like, oh, my friend has or my kid has a trans friend, and then now they're trans, and they influence on them. It's just a fad, and their whole group is trans. And this was happening before people had the language. We have always self-sorted into our communities. I think, I think back and had what I suspect of a few different trans femme friends like 20 years ago online. And during COVID, there was streaming nerdy card games online, and we had a little community in the corner of the internet, and we would play tabletop sim a few days a week, and just like playing ports of board games, and we had a little queer sub channel, and by the end of COVID, I think 4 or 5 others had transitioned, and we just had a little group of trans femmes, and we'd all been friends for a couple of years before, and most of them didn't have any idea. But we had already self-sorted and self-congregated. So I think online communities provide safety and support for people before they even know their identities, before they even know they need support, and then through that whole process. And I really think a lot of support organizations have no comprehension of this. They really think there are so many dissociated humans that are not okay and need support and are existing predominantly online. And they're just other humans. I was not any different than them for a long time, and it's weird being in analogous communities, I guess that's the wrong word. Similar communities that don't even know the other ones exist. Although a lot of thoughts that weren't necessarily the answer, but
What do you think is needed to create more inclusive environments for people who share your intersecting identities?
really hard. Often people with these identities have conflicting needs. Many of us are so deeply unsupported by support systems, by our families, by employment systems. And so there's a contrast of have a lot of needs, and if you put a whole bunch of people that all have a lot of needs in one place, there's going to be conflicting needs. There's also going to be unmet needs, and that is a reality. I think we're often focused on trying to have spaces that are only for one identity or one intersection, and there are important parts of that, and there are also parts where that's not important. I feel like having spaces that understand us more and speak over us less is important. Like there's a necessity of being understood by some people and not necessarily being understood by everybody. But like communities I have where there's no other trans people or sometimes no other autistic people are also safe communities. I'm a little struggling with this question. It's hard. We we all have different communication styles that we like or need. Isolated or living in living situations that are far from each other. Or for myself, I predominantly like to interact in person. Many of us don't drive or have the resources to, or so regardless of capacity, it's really challenging to have that. The root of it is having agency. I think many of these identities get spoken over and infantilized, and at the core of it, we need people to just let us, to support us, but also to not speak over what we know we need for ourselves. A lot of trans healthcare does the model of informed consent, and I think that needs to be like a model in mental health medication for some people, and a model in how to design communities, and a model in, you know, who's doing research on trans people and autistic people, and why are they doing it without them being involved in the planning and the questions and the interviews and stuff. And again, because the people that are doing well in life and who are you know, have the ability to enact change and to study, so many of them don't match the identities that they're supporting. And so I'm always an advocate for collaboration. I think teams should be both neurodivergent and autistic people, right? Neurodivergent and neurotypical people. I think, you know, places creating for any identity, I think should always be a mix, and that final say goes to those who have the lived experience.
How have you grown personally through understanding and embracing both of your identities?
The biggest part was that I stopped blaming myself for things that I struggled with. I have had a lot of challenges and barriers in my life, and people that have seen some of my strength, that really confuses them, especially family, because they've seen some of my capacity and consider me deeply capable. And so when I was struggling, this, regardless of why it led me to isolating, to enormous struggles with feeling inadequate, or like something was wrong with me, or like I wasn't trying hard enough. And I knew all this time that I was trying to the limit of my ability. And I knew all this time that I had strengths in different areas, but because there was this norm of, oh, you excel at these areas, so you should excel at everything compared to a typical human, the inadequacy piece was deeply disabling for me. I'll sometimes describe, when trying to like describe neurodivergence to somebody, or just my own experience. I might talk about how, say people have 100 different skills, be that communication, be that perception, be that facial reasoning, be that kindness or consideration or empathy or patience, whatever. Humans have many different qualities. And I think the baseline, to oversimplify, a neurotypical person might have all of their traits between a 5 and a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10, with a couple of outliers. And for me, mine are mostly all 10s and 1s. I'm really good at things I'm good at, and I'm incapable of doing things that are easy for other people, or it will take me 5 or 6 times more energy to do the same thing. And so all the things that I was weak at, I was putting all of my energy into things I wasn't good at, can't do, or don't enjoy doing, and none of my energy was being spent on what I'm actually good at, because they're like, oh, you're weak in these areas, we're going to work on them, rather than the strength-based style of learning that is that really suits autistic people, of, hey, let's focus on what you're good at. You know, there's this norm that okay, I'm going to go into more of a tangent here. Oh, there's so many pieces to explain this. So there's this issue with the label of autism being medicalized, and and like it's all the negative, and the thing is, like, it's only people only get a label and a diagnosis when there's something they are struggling with, when they're not fitting into society or meeting their needs or being self-sufficient. And so that's the point where people get a diagnosis. And this is a piece that contributes to stigma. There are autistic people whose brains work the same as ours. I'm explaining to the audience because I know you're aligned with a lot of it. There's a lot of humans whose brains work like ours who have never been derailed by mental health, who maybe they're an only child, they grew up with an amount of wealth, privilege, and have always been supported and had their needs met. And they get in their niche and they get to focus all their time and energy on that. They've never been derailed by mental health, and they excel. These are Nobel Prize winners. These are scientists. These are people who develop new methods for things. And they're also autistic. They don't get that label because they are in their niche. They are excelling, and they have enough money to pay for somebody to do their laundry and feed them and eat out all the time and have a driver, or they have a partner where their relationship is easy and they have a mismatch of their strengths and weaknesses, and they don't have to do the things that are hard for them. And so all their energy and time and ability gets put into what they're good at, which they're incredible at, but they're also autistic. I have a friend whose brain works very, very similar to mine, and he went to university on a whim because I did, and he was like, "Oh, I'm going to apply to Google because it would be fun and funny," and then he got hired and got promoted like 5 years in a row, and is now a senior programmer at Google. And Google's great, and so has all his meals organized, and I'm deeply oversimplifying his experience, but trying to show the point that, like, our brains are not so different. We're two, in my opinion, and he will disagree with me on this, but we're two autistic humans whose brains work similarly and who've had different circumstances that had a different result. And there are so many successful autistic people that they don't know they're autistic. People around them don't know they're autistic, and they're considered just like a little quirky, a little different. They have some particularity. Okay, can you bring me back to where the question was and where I was going with this?
The question was, how have you grown personally through understanding and embracing both of your identities?
So, I'd say we were going off on a tangent. So once I started understanding myself and my identities, I stopped being smaller for other people. Not always, but 95%. I don't compromise on things that don't work for me. Before, I would go work a job that didn't work for me, burn out, spend a year recovering my mental health, be doing better again, and be convinced to go do it all over again and do the exact same cycle. I went to post-secondary. It wasn't fitting my learning styles, but I didn't know I struggled with mental health, or that I was neurodivergent, or that I have learning disabilities, or that certain learning styles don't work for me. I didn't know any of these pieces. So I went and I'm like, oh, I'm capable of doing this. I have excelled in school other times. And I got there and I was incapable of learning. I was uninterested. I was unsupported. I didn't know how to ask for help. And my mental health plummeted. I was deeply depressed, and I flunked my courses and didn't finish. And then I recovered my mental health over the summer and was like, okay, I'm in a different place. I'm doing better again. And it was deeply pressured on me by my whole upbringing, by the people around me, by my peers, by my family. Okay, you're in a different place. Go do this again. My mental health professionals recommended this to me. And I did this cycle 3 times and did the exact same cycle 3 times. Work and school. Same process for me. And so, many years following that, I was able to understand my identity. Coming into understanding myself, I stopped compromising on what I know doesn't work for me. Rather than listening to 20 voices around me telling me, go do this thing, you can do it. And I'm like, I'm capable, and also I know for myself that does not work for me, and I've made that mistake 7 times. Knowing myself and my identities, I will not compromise those things again. I will not go do work that directly leads to me being suicidal. And I will not go do work that directly leads to me burning out. And I also stopped pretending I was something I was not. I had been recommended to pursue a disability application, and that was 4 years prior, and it took me another 2 years to do it. But from the moment I got on disability, I was like, I had some breathing room. I was like, I'm not focused on when will I be houseless next. I got to just recharge. I got to put some thought into how I would spend my time, because I thought about it as I'm receiving some financial support. How can I share my time that I have available to support others? And so I was intentionally volunteering my time. I was doing the support in my communities that I had always done, but I was doing it with intent, where I wasn't just supporting people because I could. I am existing and able to exist, and I have some energy to support other people and having that be easier. And in a year and a half from getting on disability, I volunteered my time. I took courses one at a time for things that worked for me. I took whole courses and didn't do the final tests because I didn't care about the receipt or the title. I got to have the knowledge and be able to integrate it and to share it. And so I wasn't performing for anybody. And in a year and a half, I got to a place where I was ethically and morally comfortable supporting others, and had enough supervision that they supported me in that. And I had volunteered for an organization for a year and a half who deeply saw my strengths and had tried to hire me for multiple roles, and a role came up that perfectly fit me, and now I'm doing things that are intuitive and comfortable and easy for me, and that many humans are deeply incapable of. I have unique strengths and capacity for what I'm doing, and I love it, and I never would have been able to get there. So simplifying back to the question, I am able to have confidence in myself and my strength. I'm able to set really firm boundaries. I went into the role and I was like, I can do all these things. I can't do any of these things, so if they take me 5 times as much energy, I'm not willing to. I do them occasionally as needed. And my job, I only do things I'm good at and want to do. And I don't, like, there's parts I don't like, but I don't have to do things that are deeply distressing for me. And I get to do things that are deeply distressing for others that are easy for me. And work is part of a team. And I don't have to explain myself to people. I don't feel bad about not being able to do things. I feel no guilt about ordering food or eating not well, or my house being a mess. I can work on improving them, and I'm not feeling inadequate because I exist in ways that are different to others. And the most important part that came from embracing my identities was other people get to see that. Other people are deeply inspired by me and those around me, and all I have to do is exist, because they see parts of their challenges. I get to show up to support meetings and talk about my inadequacy and connect to people through talking about how we have shared struggle and how I can't feed myself, and these are my strategies at the moment. And rather than being on a pedestal and being like, oh, this is what you should do, or like doing it in a way that doesn't work for people. Like in the ways I was deeply unsupported, so many youth are too, even when they have vast support systems, and even when they have full familial and financial and counseling support, their needs still aren't being met because they're not able to connect with people whose brains work like them, who are real, transparent, imperfect human beings like we all are. So all of that to say, I was able to have confidence in myself, which led to being able to lean into my strength and to not be disabled by feelings of inadequacy that are really rooted in nothing of substance, and which led to me being able to support many other humans in unique and invaluable ways.
And what advice would you give other autistic queer individuals who are navigating their identities?
I see a lot of people struggling with not knowing. So, like, we all deeply struggle with change and with unknowns and with uncertainty. Maybe not all, but many of us. And I think the distress from feeling like we have to know, feeling like we have to find a label that perfectly matches us, and to have language that we can neatly and comfortably describe all of our qualities in a way that some other human who can't understand us can understand us. I encourage people to move away from that. Sometimes people are searching for their identities and feel like they're not adequate until they're set on a title. Regarding relationships, there's a quote I like that goes, labels are for shopping, not for relationships. Sometimes people are like, I'm a lesbian, so I can only date other women. And then this person meets a non-binary person, and in a language to some people that doesn't fit it, into others that does. Often lesbians are non-binary inclusive, but maybe they meet a man that they're into, or they meet a trans man that they're into. And their brain breaks a little, or they think they're not supposed to, or I see this a lot less with pan people who, are just drawn to humans, as many people are, even if they don't recognize that, including myself. We're so attached to labels, and labels help people find their communities, but they shouldn't ever be restrictive. You are enough, you are trans enough, you are autistic enough, you are queer enough, you are whatever the thing is that you don't feel enough of, that you have some curiosity about. Go be a part of it. No community is going to say, hey, you're just questioning your autism, you don't have a formal diagnosis, sorry, you can't be here. That will never happen. If that happens, they're a fucking horrible community. Don't go there. They're bad people. Actually, more likely, they're not bad people. They're deeply assimilated and struggling with their own emotional and mental health. And they're early in their journey and also struggling, and they're another human being. But the point is, if you want to go, if you have curiosity about a community that you think there's a possibility they might be similar to you, go show up there. Be like, hey, I'm questioning, is it okay if I'm here? And they will say, yes, we welcome you. And you'll probably see yourself there, or you won't. And that's also fantastic. People are so nervous of taking up space. Considerate people are so nervous of taking up space. And we're allowed to take up space as long as it doesn't come at the cost of others. But I think here, our culture in Canada, we're too worried about it, too considerate, especially autistic people, especially autistic women, especially queer people, especially SEM people or AFAB people. All of these identities are deeply conditioned to be people pleasers. And this is a privilege of mine that I had some difference of experience, that I can observe that, and I would condition somewhat less of it or different. But we're, we are, words are hard. We're shooting ourselves in the foot about it. Go be a part of communities. Go be curious about them. You will be welcomed into them. And if you're not, they're not a good community, but I will be surprised if you find that.
And how can allies best support queer autistic individuals in their personal and professional lives?
Ask questions. There's some conflicting thoughts here that are hard to balance. People that hold marginalized identities do so much unvalued, unappreciated labor of educating those around them. This is endless labor that people do, advocating for themselves, educating others, supporting people around them, that is deeply unappreciated and is rarely financially supported. So there is this piece of, do not commodify somebody with unique identities to teach you. That is never an expectation. Do not expect people to educate you. On the other hand, for me, there's a piece that if I'm not educating people, they either won't be or they'll be miseducated about it. And so for me, I love educating people when I have the energy to. And I especially love educating people that I love. People around me that I care about, I have energy to educate you. I have energy to share my experiences. I clearly love talking about myself. It's a thing. And I also love hearing about other people's experiences, and it's a balance. But so often I'm misunderstood and nobody checks in. So balancing both of these pieces, ask people around you, what is your experience? How has this impacted you? What are some things I don't understand about this? And also do a check-in. Do you have energy for this? Do you have capacity? I'm not expecting you to educate me, but I'm interested if you're up for it. And so just check in and also listen to humans who have lived experience. And when that conflicts with what you know or what is intuitive to you or what you think, don't speak over it. You can have a different opinion or a different thought. Hold both. Hold their experience and reality. And also know somebody who has lived experience knows it better than you do. And it is likely you are wrong if your thoughts are different than that. But you don't have to change your opinion. You just have to listen and hold it as their reality, their experience. You can have two different experiences. You can have two different opinions. You can disagree with them, but ask and listen. And if you're trying to improve something and you ask for input and you get the input, do it.
And what changes would you like to see in society regarding acceptance and support of queer autistic people?
Oof. I'm working on a couple different studies right now, trying to improve healthcare things. There's a norm that queer people face many more barriers to autism diagnosis. Autistic people face many more barriers to mental health support. To gender, like trans medicine, and often to medication. Yeah, there's the vast majority of doctors are normal humans. They're humans who, had a worldview and then went to med school for 10 years and then started being a doctor and have lived a very different, disconnected life and have less human experience or identity experience or lived experience of these identities. And so, like, the reality is most of them are deeply unequipped for supporting trans people and autistic people. That is the reality. Those that are able to support these identities usually can only support one, whereas to like oversimplify it, say half of trans people are autistic. Supports for queer communities need to be neurodivergent, affirmative, and educated, and supports for neurodivergent communities need to be queer supported and educated. They're inextricable for so many people. Often somebody who is autistic hasn't had the safety or support to explore their queer identity yet. Often somebody who is trans hasn't had the support and safety to explore their neurodivergent identity yet. I think a lot of autistic people, by the time they're 40, are probably queer. I think a lot of trans people, by the time they're 40, will also have understanding of that they're neurodivergent. Just because people don't have a label or don't know it themselves doesn't mean that they are not. And so anybody that is supporting either of these identities needs to learn about both. And really the biggest change that needs to happen is our education system needs to stop being ableist. There needs to be different learning styles embraced, different pathways to knowledge, knowledge from different sources valued. We need to value lived experience as unlearnable, because it is for the vast majority of people. In some Scandinavian post-secondary schools, so here, if you want to go do a master's, you have to have a bachelor degree of 4 years. In some of the schools in Scandinavia, they have an equivalency where a certain amount of lived experience is equivalent to a bachelor's. And so, like, for somebody who has spent 10 years struggling with being autistic and has deep understandings of anxiety and depression and, say, OCD tendencies or experiences, they have a far deeper understanding than a 24-year-old who has just finished their bachelor's, or a 22-year-old who had just finished their bachelor's in psychology. And who are the people that get to go do masters here? The 22-year-olds who finished their psychology degree and literally have never experienced depression in their life. And so then you have, you know, a master's of psychology, or you have a psychiatrist who has never experienced depression, who is not neurodivergent, who cannot comprehend trans people. And these are our support systems. That is wildly unacceptable when there's humans who have lived experience, who are brilliant, who their lives had a 10-year different trajectory because they were doing invaluable self-work on their identities and their mental health, and they're deeply prepared for supporting their communities. And we value this knowledge, but not this knowledge. We pay this knowledge 10 times or 50 times what we pay this knowledge. Peer support workers that are working in the downtown side that have lived houseless for a long time have so much knowledge and understanding of the needs of their communities that you cannot learn in a school system. The ideal is a mix of both. Is never just one, just the other. The idea is both. I'm not saying this is worthless. This is different knowledge than this knowledge. And the reality is we either need teams or we need people that have both, where we have an equivalency of, hey, you have enough lived experience. Here is a program built for you where we will get you to the place where you can be supporting your communities that you deeply understand better than any other human on the earth. And so, yeah, my wish is for knowledge from different sources to be valued and for lived experience to be invaluable. And I mean, it is invaluable, but to be financially invaluable, because it will help those that need help who are currently incapable of receiving help from the helpers that currently exist. And it is so frustrating to interact with. And you have so many humans who are incapable of helping, who are, you know, have enough money to have a whole family. And you have other people who can't make rent, who are deeply capable of actually helping and who are not even given the opportunity because our systems don't value them.
And how do you envision the future for the next generation of queer autistic individuals?
I have a front row seat to it. Like, the vast majority of youth I'm supporting fit those identities, and I get to support them. It is incredible seeing the change month to month, seeing the change over a year of these individuals with how deeply capable and brilliant they are, and how hilarious and talented and joyful and creative these youth are. That the ones that have this privilege of knowing themselves and having language to describe themselves and having community with peers like them and having support systems and building these robust support systems with each other. They are all struggling and caring for each other together and growing in incredible ways in extremely short periods of time. And some of them do this with almost no support, and others do this with a lot of support, and they also share their support around. It is incredible seeing people like get the opportunity to, be kids, be human beings, be, make mistakes and grow and learn and make so many dumb decisions and also like be so welcoming and inviting to others. They're the ones I'm supporting are going to run the city in 10 years, or be doing all sorts of incredible things. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm putting them on a pedestal as people did to me, and they'll be, depressed in their houses in 10 years and hating the world. Both. I love that there are some support systems. I love that there is shared language and knowledge, and most importantly, joy. I love that they have peers to complain about how horrendous the system is, and that it's okay for them all to be depressed together and having a really hard time. I hate this word, but so deeply resilient. They're so powerful, and also it's so hard to see what they have to deal with and what we have to deal with, and that it's probably not going to change. The world is not magically going to be better and equitable and supportive, but having community, being connected with others, having sense of self and identity is incredible. My brother's kid is like a year and a half, definitely autistic, dresses herself every day. She was born 3 months premature and had an appointment this week, and apparently she's supposed to know 6 to 10 words at this age, and she knows 60. She learned 5 this week. That is what we look like when we're supported, and it makes me happy to see. And this kid dresses herself every day, and some old lady was, being horrendous to my sister-in-law and saying, "Look at this person dressing their kid in brown. That's so tragic. They're going to turn out gay." I'm like, what is wrong with humans? The world is always going to be horrible. People are always going to be in their own worlds and deeply incapable of understanding others. And that's not going to change. But what's changing is our ability to connect to others, our ability to support each other, and to build communities, and to care for each other, and to share our resources and our knowledge, because other people don't get it enough to be able to, and that's okay. The world is hard, and it's so nice to see joy in those that are like me, that are much younger, and they empower me and give me a lot of hope that I am then able to give back. And it's community care, and I love it.
And in closing, is there anything else you would like to share about your journey or experiences, or any last words of wisdom you'd like to share with us?
It's okay to not fit in the box. A little lackluster. I think I've said the pieces I care about, and I have some of that was shortened, and I have other ideas of other tangents, but that was just lovely to come share, and I hope it might be significant for someone. If it makes a difference for one human, then it was worth my time. And if it makes a difference for no humans, it was nice for me. And it was nice to spend some time with you.
It's good to spend time with you too. I'm so glad you were able to come and share. And thank you for sharing all of your experience and wisdom that you've gained.
Thank you for inviting me. If you want me back sometime, maybe we'll have more of a conversation. And your questions were so good, so I had so much to input on.
That does it for this episode of The Pulse. As always, if you have questions or ideas you'd like to discuss, or if you want to be a guest on the show, send an email to voa@pacificautismfamily.com. We look forward to more of your great questions. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you next time.